Jean sat in the car and realized that something was wrong. Finn was sitting in the driver's seat, and Monica was in the passenger's seat. Fourth Master Swan was sitting in the back seat. He was sitting next to Jean at the moment, and George was sitting on her other side. Jean pursed her lips. Monica was very excited. She turned to Jean and said, "Jean, I watched your live stream the whole time. You have no idea how excited I was. I couldn't wait to rush into the venue and clap for you." Jean did not reply. All she wanted to know at this moment was why Fourth Master Swan was sitting in this car. Monica continued, "I've been thinking about how you wouldn't marry that scum from the Locks. Given your father's cruel personality, he wouldn't let you break off the engagement. Perhaps he would even beat you half to death as he did 7 years ago. Just thinking about it now made me shudder. Now, that just cheated with someone outside and became so miserable. What's more, you actually have the recording of the conversation between Thegis and his mother. No matter what, it's all the fault of the Locks. Your father can't force you to admit that it's your fault like he did 7 years ago, right? He can't force you to get married, right? If he still wants you to get married now, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face?" Jean looked at Monica. Monica was actually more simple-minded. Jean did not want Monica to become too complicated. This was because a person needed to experience too much to become complicated, and she could not bear to let Monica go through all that. Therefore, she would not tell Monica what she would have to face after breaking off the engagement this time, would not be any less than the scene from 7 years ago. The plot was surprisingly similar. Despite that, the ending must not be the same. Jean deliberately changed the topic. "Dr. Finn, you came too." Before Finn could say anything, Monica was unusually agitated. "Jean, I realized that you often mentioned Finn when we were together these past few days. Have you taken a fancy to him?" Finn was speechless. He looked at Edward, who was sitting calmly behind, through the rearview mirror. Monica was truly born to conflict with Finn. Perhaps one day, Finn would be killed by her. Finn hurriedly said, "I came with Fourth Master Swan." Jean's eyes moved slightly as she turned to look at that master. Their eyes met. Fourth Master Swan looked nonchalant, but he seemed to be able to see through everything. Jean averted her gaze and did not say anything. She said politely to Finn, "Please send me back to the Lawrence family's manor." "Okay." Finn nodded. He drove on the wide highway. Along the way, because Monica was present, there was no awkwardness. Monica talked non-stop, and Jean occasionally echoed. The men in the car, including George, were all silent. Fortunately, the destination was not far away, and the car soon arrived at the Lawrence family's courtyard. Jean got out of the car and said politely to Finn, "Thank you." "There's no need to thank me," Finn replied politely. Jean did not greet the others and left with George. Monica's voice came from behind. "Jeannie, if your father makes things difficult for you because of this, don't hold back. You must give me a call. I'll destroy their old residence." Jean smiled. Sometimes, Monica could really make her heart feel warm. Jean held George's hand and walked into the Lawrence family's courtyard. They walked past the garden path and into the main hall. A slap landed fiercely on Jean's face. Jean did not expect it. At that moment, George was about to break free from Jean's hand, but he was fiercely grabbed by Jean. George's eyes were red. Jean knew he was feeling sorry for her. Alexander cursed at Jean, "I regret letting you come back. A person like you who doesn't know what's good for you should die outside." Jean looked at him coldly. "I hope you won't regret what you said. I'll get even with you later," Alexander said through gritted teeth. Then, he left in large strides. It was not that he did not care, but that the Swans were still around. Alexander cared about his reputation and could not do too much to her. Jean watched Alexander leave. She lowered her head to look at George. Jean looked at George's face, which was flushed red from anger. She forced a smile and was about to comfort her son when she suddenly heard a deep male voice behind her, "Aren't you going to resist?" Jean turned around. Fourth Master Swan was standing just a step away from her. She did not know if he had seen the scene just now. He probably did, but it was not important to her. Jean faced him and asked indifferently, "Will it do anything?" Fourth Master Swan took a step forward. This step allowed the distance between them to become much closer. It was not to the extent of crossing the line, but it was still somewhat flirtatious. Hence, Jean held George's hand and took a step back. Fourth Master Swan looked at her action calmly. Jean turned around and was about to leave. "It will, at least to me," the person behind her suddenly spoke again. Jean's footsteps paused. 7 years ago. Fourth uncle. Jean interrupted him. According to seniority, that was how she should call Edward indeed. This was all the more so because of the relationship between Eden and Jasmine. Jean said, please have some self-respect. Then, she led George into the Lawrence residence's main hall. She did not care about the emotions of the person behind her even though she could feel his intense gaze. Ellipsis. Jean and George returned to their room. George seemed to have something to say. Jean patted his head and said, let me go take a shower first. As such, George endured it and nodded obediently. Jean walked into the bathroom. To say that she was not affected at all. She looked at her swollen face in the mirror. It was impossible for her to remain indifferent. Nevertheless, she would tolerate the small things and be ruthless during the big things. It was not yet to the point where Jean needed to be ruthless. She adjusted her emotions and quickly washed up. Once things did not go smoothly, she would habitually take a shower. Between her body and mind, one had to be clean. She took a bath and went out. George was sitting on the sofa with his tablet in his arms. When he saw her come out, he called out to her, Mom, Kingsley. Jean was drying her hair. She walked over in her pajamas. George was on a video call with Kingsley. When George saw Jean come over, he handed the tablet to her and walked to the side. On the screen, Kingsley's huge face could be seen. Jean looked disdainful. Can you pay attention to the angle? Do you know you look ugly? Do I? Kingsley smiled and asked, do I still need to pay attention to my image in front of you? I'm obsessed with appearances. Kingsley fiddled with his camera and changed the angle. Is this okay? Much better, Jean replied and asked, what's the matter? You were slapped by Alexander. Kingsley looked more serious. Jean looked at George who was beside her. George pretended not to see it and sat in front of his computer, typing on the keyboard. Did it hurt? Kingsley asked. Don't be hypocritical. Haven't I been slapped by you before? Jean was speechless. I didn't hurt your feelings, Kingsley forcefully argued. Alexander can't hurt my feelings either. Jean was indifferent. I've seen through it long ago. Really, Jean answered with some impatience. Is there anything else? If not, I'll hang up. Remember to apply some medicine to reduce the swelling. Jean pressed the button to hang up. It was not that she was impatient, but she did not need to be comforted. She was not so fragile, especially when dealing with the Lawrences.